Imagine a man who has stared into madness and found poetry. A man who has danced with demons, yet conducted them like an orchestra. He is the voice of intellect, the face of terror, and the soul of an artist who refuses to die quietly. This is Anthony Hopkins, the quiet storm of genius. From a working-class boy in the gray industrial heart of Wales to one of the most respected and enigmatic actors in the world, his journey is not just about fame, it's about survival, article, redemption, and the eternal question, who am I when the mask comes off? Hopkins is more than Hannibal Lecter, more than the knighted actor or the Hollywood legend. He is a man whose life oscillates between brilliance and breakdown, between solitude and applause, between creation and chaos. And tonight, we dive deep into the labyrinth of his mind, tracing the path from his small Welsh beginnings to his global reign as one of cinema's immortals. Anthony Hopkins was born on December 31st, 1937 in Margam, near Port Talbot, Wales, a town of coal smoke, sea winds, and working-class grit. His father, Richard Hopkins, was a baker, and his mother, Muriel, a strong, loving woman who held the family together. Hopkins grew up a solitary child, shy, and often lost in his imagination. While other boys played football, Anthony would spend hours alone sketching, daydreaming, or tinkering on the piano. He later said, "I didn't have much of an education. I just wanted to be left alone. To dream, he struggled in school. Dyslexia made reading difficult, and teachers labeled him lazy or distracted. But beneath that quiet surface was a storm brewing, a mind hungry for stories, a heart longing for expression. At 15, a single encounter changed his life. He met Richard Burton, the great Welsh actor who had returned to visit their hometown. Burton, commanding, magnetic, and larger than life, spoke about acting as a kind of magic. Hopkins was captivated. "I saw Burton," he recalled, "and I thought, that's what I want." He left the drab certainty of Port Talbot behind and began chasing something elusive, a purpose, a voice. He enrolled in the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in Cardiff, then later the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. But in those early years, Hopkins was restless. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to disappear, to become. The 1960s in London were electric. Art, rebellion, and reinvention everywhere. Hopkins was part of that storm, though he often stood on its edges, observing. He joined the National Theatre under the direction of Laurence Olivier, one of the greatest actors of the century. Olivier quickly recognized something extraordinary in the young Welshman, a raw, volcanic talent. But Hopkins' intensity made him unpredictable. He would memorize lines obsessively, but his energy burned too hot, too wild. He once confessed, "I had no discipline. I was impulsive. I drank. I fought. I wanted to feel alive every second of the day." Still, the stage became his sanctuary. Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, he played them all, channeling his inner chaos into characters of mythic proportions. Critics began to notice his performances weren't just skilled, they were dangerous. Then came the television and film roles. The Lion in Winter, 1968, marked his first big breakthrough, acting opposite Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn. Hopkins held his ground, intense, mysterious, and unpredictable. It was the beginning of a reputation that would follow him for decades. The man who could never be ordinary. But behind that success was turmoil. Hopkins' drinking worsened. He would vanish for days, miss rehearsals, and wake up in strange places without memory, of how he'd gotten there. Fame wasn't fulfilling, it was feeding the void. By the mid-1970s, Anthony Hopkins was lost. His marriage had collapsed. His career felt hollow. He drank heavily every night, every morning. He called it a slow suicide. Then, one night in December 1975, everything changed. Hopkins woke up in a hotel room in Arizona. He had no memory of how he'd gotten there. No luggage, no wallet, no clue. That was his breaking point. "I was finished," he later said. "Something had to change, or I was going to die." He joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and that moment marked the beginning of a new life. Sobriety for Hopkins wasn't just about stopping drinking. It was about rebirth. He began painting again, composing music, and reading philosophy. More importantly, he began to understand the depth of human emotion, the pain, the fragility, the madness that he would later pour into his performances. When asked years later how he managed to stay sober, Hopkins said, "I asked for help, and I got it. There was a shift, a power greater than myself." This awakening changed everything. It gave him clarity, control, and an almost spiritual discipline that would define his later career. And then, in 1991, the world met Dr. Hannibal Lecter, and nothing would ever be the same. It's one of the most chilling introductions in cinema history. A man behind bars, calm, polite, and terrifying. "Good evening, Clarice." When The Silence of the Lambs hit theaters in 1991, Anthony Hopkins became an overnight icon. He was on screen for only 16 minutes, yet his portrayal of Hannibal Lecter burned itself into film history. Hopkins approached the role with surgical precision. He didn't play a monster. He played a genius, intelligent, elegant, even charming, with eyes that saw straight through your soul. He based Lecter's poise on HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, and his unnerving stillness came from watching reptiles, cold-blooded creatures that don't blink before they strike. When he first read the script, Hopkins thought it was a love story. "Lecter loves Clarice," he said, "not in a romantic way, but as a kindred spirit, another outcast trying to survive." His performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor, but more than that, it made him immortal. Overnight, Hopkins became a symbol of controlled intensity. He didn't need explosions or shouting. His power was silence, precision, presence. The world finally saw what the theater already knew. Anthony Hopkins wasn't just an actor, he was an instrument, capable of symphonies most of us could barely comprehend. After The Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins became a Hollywood powerhouse almost overnight. Scripts poured in from every direction, thrillers, dramas, historical epics. He was no longer just the actor's actor from the British stage. He was a global phenomenon. He followed up with Howard's End, 1992, The Remains of the Day, 1993, and Legends of the Fall, 1994. Performances that proved he was far more than the sum of his darkness. He could convey heartbreak, loyalty, and repressed desire with the subtlest glance. In The Remains of the Day, his portrayal of Butler Stevens, a man who sacrifices love for duty, became one of the most nuanced performances of the decade. Directors began to speak about Hopkins in reverent tones. James Ivory called him a master of stillness. Richard Attenborough said, "He doesn't act. He becomes," but Hollywood success came with new temptations, fame, expectations, the constant demand to perform. Hopkins, now in his mid-50s, felt a strange detachment from it all. "I never felt part of it," he once said. Hollywood was never home. I always felt like a visitor there, and yet the city needed him. He became the father figure, the wise man, the king in Nixon, Amistad, and later The Mask of Zorro. His voice, that deep, resonant instrument, carried gravitas like no one else's. As his fame grew, Hopkins began to experiment. He started painting more seriously, composing orchestral pieces and writing music that reflected his inner calm. One critic called him a Renaissance man trapped in the age of blockbusters. By the early 2000s, he had achieved everything: wealth, fame, respect. But something inside him whispered that the story wasn't over. There were still shadows to confront. For all his achievements, Anthony Hopkins never escaped the solitude that had defined him since childhood. "I am a loner," he admitted in one interview. "Always have been. Always will be." He didn't seek company. He didn't go to parties. He rarely stayed in one place for long. Fame, he said, was like mist, beautiful at first light, but it vanishes when the sun rises. Hopkins' greatest battle was not with alcohol anymore. It was with himself. He often spoke about the fragility of ego, about how success could trap you in illusions. "You must kill the actor inside you," he once said, "before it kills the human being." In those years, he began to meditate, to read deeply, from Jung to Tolstoy to Nietzsche. He explored spirituality not through religion, but through silence and art. "We are not our fears," he said in a 2009 interview. "We are the awareness behind them." He began painting every morning before acting. Bright, surreal works filled with movement and color. For him, painting was therapy, a form of prayer. "It's chaos on canvas," he laughed, "but it's mine." Hopkins also found love again. His marriage to Stella Arroyave brought him peace and companionship after decades of loneliness. "She saved my life," he said simply. "She brought me laughter again." Yet even in happiness, he remained philosophical. Everything ends. That's the beauty of it. That mindset became the secret behind his performances, the acceptance of impermanence, the embrace of the now. Just when Hollywood thought they'd seen all of Anthony Hopkins, he surprised the world again. At an age when most actors slowed down, he evolved. In The Father, 2020, Hopkins delivered one of the most devastating performances in modern cinema. Playing an aging man losing his grip on reality, he portrayed dementia not as weakness, but as a haunting labyrinth of confusion and fleeting clarity. It earned him his second Academy Award for Best Actor at 83 years old. And fittingly, he didn't even attend the ceremony. Instead, he was home in Wales, sleeping while the world celebrated. When he awoke to the news, he simply said, "Thank you." The role was more than a performance. It was a reflection of his philosophy: life, memory, identity, all temporary, all beautiful. "We are just passing through," he said. "The trick is to enjoy the ride." After The Father, he continued to act, not for fame, but for joy. He lent his voice to music, to social media, to painting, often posting videos of himself dancing in his studio, smiling, carefree. The once tormented man had found peace in simplicity. And then came Armageddon, Time, and One Life, roles that continued to explore age, morality, and wisdom. Hopkins had entered a new era, not of survival, but of serenity. Today, Sir Anthony Hopkins stands as one of the last titans of an era that believed in craft over celebrity, in stillness over spectacle. His life has become a study in transformation. From troubled youth to sober artist, from lost soul to enlightened man. His story reminds us that redemption is possible, that pain can be transmuted into beauty. Hopkins himself often rejects the idea of legacy. "When I die," he says. "I won't be around to care what people think." But the truth is, his legacy is already etched in time, not just in his films, but in the humanity he's brought to every frame. He is the eternal student, curious, humble, ever evolving. Even in his 80s, he continues to paint, compose, and share his art online, connecting with fans around the world. "Technology," he laughs, "lets me be a mad old man in color." In interviews, Hopkins has described acting as a sacred madness. It's the willingness to lose yourself, not for fame, but for truth. Acting, he said, is about listening to yourself, to silence, to what's real. And perhaps that's why his performances still move us, because they come from a place beyond ambition. They come from life itself. So, who is Anthony Hopkins really? A genius? A philosopher? A survivor? Perhaps all three, and something more. He's a reminder that greatness isn't born in perfection, but in persistence. That art isn't about escaping your demons, but learning to live with them. From the streets of Port Talbot to the global stage, he has carried with him the quiet dignity of a man who never stopped learning, never stopped creating, and never stopped seeking peace in chaos. He has lived 1,000 lives, on stage, on screen, in his own mind. And through them all, he has shown us that the truest form of acting is simply being alive. As he once said, "When you let go of the need to control everything, life begins to dance with you." And in that dance, raw, graceful, and real, Anthony Hopkins remains not just an actor, but a mirror to the human soul. You've just listened to another story from StoryVault, a place where lives, legends, and moments are kept alive. If this journey spoke to you, if it made you think, smile, or see the world a little differently, do me a favor. Tap that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because here at StoryVault, there's always another story waiting to be told. And I'd love to share it with you. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive. And I'll see you in the next story.